So you've been in Iowa several times, and we were
Yes.
talking about this before you came on. On the issue of trade, you've really set yourself apart. How?
Well, I was one of the few Democrats to support the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was a big effort of President Obama's. And I think he was clearly right, not only as a matter of domestic policy, but really of foreign policy and kind of our geopolitical positioning in Asia. And based on what the president has done, is effectively he's a nationalist and he's, tore
So you're a
up the
globalist.
TPP.
You're embracing the globalist term.
I believe that becoming part of a global economy has clearly been good for us, but it hasn't been good for everyone.
So how do you sell that? How do you sell that to Iowa?
You sell that by going to Iowa and showing what you're going to do to take care of people who are left behind on trade. It wasn't a mistake to become part of the global economy. What was a terrible mistake was to not do real things for people who were left behind by it. We've seen massive dislocation in this country, and we should have done real things decades ago to ensure that investment capital was flowing in communities that are left behind, that people have the skills they need to be able to thrive and get a job in the new economy. We didn't do any of that stuff. And why? Because we were too busy fighting. So I have a whole agenda to actually get capital flowing into places that haven't had investment in decades, to make sure people have the skills they need to get a job with the jobs that we have today. So I have a whole agenda to balance off the effect of trade, really.
How will Democrats taking over the House next year affect these trade issues, Congressman, given that we've already heard from a key Democrat saying that even the NAFTA 2.0 deal would need to be renegotiated or it would be dead in Congress?
Well, look, I think that agreement has to be approved in Congress, so we should have a big debate about it. I'm hoping we can also get back, because really NAFTA 2.0 was in many ways part of TPP to some extent, right? So I hope we get back to having the right kind of conversation we should be having about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, because I think that deal could potentially be very beneficial to the United States of America.
And of course, you won't be back in Congress next year, but we are already seeing talks over the leadership in the House. Already more than a dozen Democrats pledging to vote against Nancy Pelosi as House Speaker. Give us your thoughts about the leadership.
So Nancy Pelosi will be the Speaker of the House. Right. She has tremendous support in the caucus. I think she's earned it based on the things she's done historically and what she did to win this election, which was incredibly important. But I do think what soon-to-be Speaker Pelosi needs to do, and it's incredibly important, is she should lead the caucus through a discussion about what is the next phase of leadership. How does she manage her own succession? So there's no one running against her. She did a very good job this election. So I think she's actually in a good position and deserves to be the Speaker in this next Congress. But I also think it's incumbent on her to actually begin the conversation about who are the next leaders.
To get that
Absolutely.
new generation. Yeah. I was reading in the Washington Post the other day, want to topple Trump, take John Delaney seriously by George Will. So you've got a pretty glowing endorsement from George Will. How do you mobilize centrist voters in the Iowa caucus or even in New Hampshire, particularly when we hear the Senator Bernie Sanders crowds, the Elizabeth Warren crowd, that they want to, that they're motivated. They want to get to the polls.
So this last midterms, I think, is a roadmap for the party going forward. The candidates who won the key races in these midterms, who flipped Republican seats to Democratic seats, those candidates ran on a Big Tent party. Right. Being an inclusive party, welcoming progressive, centrist. Well, I think the whole country in general, I mean, this country is either a center-left or center-right country, depending upon the mood. And I think if the Democratic Party has a once-in-a-generational opportunity right now to be the party the American people are looking for, a party that leads, a party that brings us together. The central question this country is wrestling with is how do we take this terribly divided nation where American is pitted against American? And the president encourages that. How do we start bringing it back together?
You were the youngest ever chief executive on the New York Stock Exchange. Yes. You were like a startup businessman. I've got a business question for you.
Sure.
Was it smart for Amazon to split up those headquarters in currently your backyard of your district? You're not going to be there next year, as well as New York.
So listen, I'm a big believer in the Washington metro area. I think it was a smart decision for them to do that. I would have loved to have seen Amazon put one of their headquarters in a place that hasn't been doing so well economically, right? I mean, Washington, D.C., New York, these places have had really good decades of economic growth. I would have loved to have seen them put one of these headquarters is in a place that has had a harder time economically. I mean, one of the problems we have in this country right now is last year, 80% of the professionally managed venture capital went to 50 counties out of 3,000.
Wow.
So 50 counties got 80% of the smart startup capital.
Talk about the swamp.
Right, yet 70% of our kids live in a county where there's no evidence of upward economic mobility. So I would have loved to have seen Amazon make the decision to put one of those headquarters down in a place that was struggling. They didn't do that. You know, they put it here in the D.C. area, which is great. I mean, as someone who represents this area, I'm happy that it's here.
Right.
But that's what I would have loved to have seen.
Congressman, talking about tech companies, these have been one of the industries that have been really hit during the midterms, after the midterms, before the midterms. The assumption that whether it's a blue wave or not is that more regulation will be put in place. Were investors right?
Well, I think we clearly need regulation around privacy. I think what's happened to the privacy of our citizens in the last really 10 years with the growth of the technology companies is something that needs to be at the forefront of public policy debate. I mean, I've called for a national artificial intelligence strategy, for example, because I think it's one of the most important things going on in our country right now, yet we don't have a coordinated strategy between the private sector and the public sector, the nonprofit sector, to ensure that this technology plays out as beneficially for all of our citizens. But privacy, particularly for children, which is an area where my wife and I have actually done a lot of work. She helps run a nonprofit that focuses on this issue, is a central issue for this country. I mean, we have a right as citizens to say what our data can be used for. And so to the extent the markets are factoring that into why the stocks are down, I can't say for sure. I'm not in that business anymore. But to the extent that's what they're doing, they're probably right, because I think the American people want it. I'm on the road in Iowa, and I'll talk to citizens about these devices, and I'll talk to them about how, you know, are your children addicted to these things, right? Are they pulling them out all the time? And every single head nods in the room.
Not just kids, grandparents, too. We got to go, but should Hillary Clinton run again?
No, we need new leaders.